Welcome to the 71st episode of the interview series, a production of One Week Critique, an Iowa-based nonprofit organization that offers educational resources and editorial support to students and teachers of the literary arts. You can learn more about us and our programs or support our work by visiting our website, oneweekcritique.com. I'm Jon Riccio, joined today by Anca Szilágyi. Anca's writing appears in Lilith Magazine, Orion Magazine, and Los Angeles Review of Books, among other publications. She is the author of the novels Daughters of the Air, Lanternfish Press 2017, which Shelf Awareness called a striking debut from a writer to watch, and Dreams Under Glass, which is why we're all here today, 2022, also Lanternfish Press. She currently lives in Chicago with her husband and son and teaches creative writing online at Atlas Obscura, Hugo House, Story Studio Chicago, and the Newberry Library. Greetings, Anca.
Hi, John. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Let's get right into it with the discussion of your novel, which Nancy Juyeon Kim writes that Dreams Under Glass is a darkly delicious exploration of modern entrapment, a horror story about gluttony, greed, and art. Szilágyi binds the spell with confectionery precision and a collector's sense of wonder and ceaseless want. I'm looking back at your inscription to me, noting that you concluded it by drawing a blood vessel-y eye. A few chapters in, I made the connection between this image and the importance of glass eyes throughout the work, from shards of one to the 18 prosthetic eyes protagonist Binny Greensun orders at novel's end. Dreams Under Glass reignited my passion for page-by-page annotations. And just to show all of our viewers, and there's the little blood vessel eye. And here's my annotation process. And some of the marginalia that I've put on those individual pages are dreamer, daughter, friend, paralegal, Binny's doubt process at work, Binny, the boss killer, question mark, and frenemy as failed sushi model. We'll chat more about my concluding annotation, Bildungsroman with Neuroses Assist. But first, I would love to hear what inspired you to write a novel about a 25-year-old office worker at the height of the 2008-2009 financial meltdown, dioramas and proposed architectural makeovers central to Binny's inner thoughts.
Thank you so much for that introduction, John. So what inspired this story? Well, to be honest, I did work as a paralegal in the lipstick building in the years 2008, 2009, and I got to see the Bernie Madoff scandal explode while I was there. The rest of the, real life and story diverge there because my work as a paralegal was pretty boring. But the things that were interesting to me were the architecture. So thank you for bringing that up. But the lipstick building, which is like this round pink glass tower, is kind of elliptical in shape. And just, it was very cool. I was like one of the few nice things about the time there, which is like, especially in winter or on a rainy day, to see the weather patterns kind of whipping around from the 30-something floor. And I had gone into the work of being a paralegal after a couple of years of teaching ESL part-time for $15 an hour. And what I really wanted was to write. And I decided I wanted an MFA, and to get there, part-time ESL instruction, maybe that wasn't going to work. So I got this job that was like a more like office worker, full-time job, and I was like, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to figure it out. And I was working on my first book at the time. And I didn't have time to write in that time, but I kind of, one of the things that I told myself was, this is grist for the mill. I'm going to do something with this. And, you know, writing about a writer, that would have been kind of boring. So that's where the art came in. I was like, let's do something visual. I love to engage with visual art. And that's how we started to give something I hope is more imaginative
Mhm.
for the landscape of this novel. Yeah.
Yes. And for those of us who are a little bit not quite clear what paralegals do, I mean,
Oh
I have
yeah.
a vague idea of it, but what might your 9 to 5 existence consist of in paralegal land?
A lot of paper cuts.
Hmm.
A lot of photocopying. You know, this is 2008, 2009. Like digital stuff was around, but there was still a lot of make two copies of this, put it in two files. Take, you know, physically take this to the court and get it stamped. And um, I did like the field trips to the courts to get out of the office, see something different. Some of those basements were really interesting and atmospheric to me. And yeah, a lot of just, you know, organizing files chronologically or like searching for keywords of things. And the most interesting for me as a writer was like researching particular people who were going to be deposed. So like then I could be like, oh, who is this guy? And you know, that then you can get into like real life stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
We had something similar in fundraising where when we would do donor prospects, there was a database called LexisNexis where if you paid the subscription series and it would show you who's got boat licenses, who's got pilot's licenses, who has with those licenses, you see more and more zeros behind the potential gift you could ask them for. So
Right.
that was the best part of, I would say, fundraising. It's John just plugging away at LexisNexis and building the profiles, printing out the profiles and putting them into those folders, the little dossiers I would hand off to my executive director.
Nice. Yeah.
When I was 25, New York City was the last place I wanted to build a life. Now, part of me thinks of nothing more than finding a college teaching position in one of the boroughs, accompanied by, and this is part of the deal. It has to be a seamless moving day, and that apartment has to be stocked with built-in bookshelves.
Hmm.
There's a passage I've excerpted where Binny is eating with her parents, Albert and Arlene, and I love this because your writing ties housing and literature together so seamlessly. Binny tapped at the char. It crumbled easily. Creme brulee a la Chez Greenson. Her mouth curled. It just doesn't feel safe and all. When I'm on the subway, all alone at 9 o'clock, she hoped they wouldn't ask about the black cars she could take when she worked that late, the fancy cars that whisked her home anytime she worked past 8. Living in Manhattan would be liberating. The idea of adulthood she'd had as a child. Well, it seems like an enormous waste to me. Al patted Arlene's arm. Benny mashed her finger into the charcoal. Of course, she'd been grateful for Ruby's apartment. She'd been grateful and grateful and grateful. Charred crumbs stuck to her skin, but at what cost? It was a never ending cycle. Don't want a bat mitzvah? Do it for Ruby and you'll reap the rewards. Want to go to college? Study something useful or foot the bill. Whatever support was lovingly offered came with strings, and she was starting to feel beholden, stifled. And here she was acting like a child, pouting over her dessert and justifying her choices to her parents. Binny carried the dessert plates into the kitchen. Arlene said, "Thank you, honey," satisfied that she'd gotten the last word. There was no arguing with her. Hot water blasted the dishes. Let her think what she'll think. Meanwhile, Binny would think her own thoughts and go her own way. Stop living in Ruby's tomb. Maybe a new place would grant her a sense of artistic freedom, she thought as she scrubbed. Shake things up, and she could sleep later, be home quicker, not marinate in the scent of ancient mothballs. Whatever she found would be considerably smaller and more expensive, but then wouldn't that be the true New York City experience? As a small girl, she'd assumed that by 25 she'd be married and living in one of those castle-like buildings next to Central Park, a great big sparkler on her manicured ring finger. A babysitter had patted her curly head as a toddler, saying, "Oh, you'll be a looker. Marry rich, kid. No dice." Ha! She left her parents to brew their after-dinner chamomile tea and peered into her old bedroom, now what her parents referred to as the den. Her father's stack of spy thrillers and Star Trek novels had doubled in size, wobbling toward the height of their matching ochre velour armchairs. Her mother's books, neatly stacked on a shelf, remained the same. Mitch Albom's entire oeuvre, a dozen historical romances arranged by era, and the well-thumbed pea green tome titled Heal Yourself Today. Dozens of Starship Enterprise models cluttered the remaining shelves. Yarn and crochet needles lay on a side table in a snarl. All evidence of Binny's life in that room gone. And of course, I wrote Trekkie for that page's annotation. How do metropolitan settings develop your characters' backstories? And on the other side of that coin, since I read Sherwood Anderson's Winesburg, Ohio, simultaneously with Dreams Under Glass, how have you used small town settings to accomplish the same task?
I love this question. I'm obsessed with place, and particularly with cities. I grew up in New York, in central Brooklyn, and living in Chicago, I feel like there are elements that feel like an alternate universe New York to me. So that's very exciting, creatively to kind of be in this like, oh, here are these things that look a little bit like home, but they're different, and so it kind of feels like a dream. And so in thinking about developing characters from a place. Well, for instance, with Dreams Under Glass, doing character sketches for each of the characters, I really thought about like down to like, oh, this person has a particular Bronx accent, and this person has a particular, Brooklyn accent, and I even kind of sent those notes. There's an audiobook that came out in 2024, and I think I sent those notes for the narrator. I don't know if they got to her, but it's a great audiobook. But I love the vibrancy of a city and like the just bursting with possibility, the architecture, the histories that are layered, and so like in thinking about how individuals are shaped by where they grow up and where they are, it's like a crucial part of developing a story for me. Um, Small towns I have less experience with, but because of that, I think, when I do end up writing something set in a small town or a small city, like say like Victoria, British Columbia is like much smaller city that when I lived in Seattle, I went to a number of times. I get more into a fairy tale mode. That you and I we've collaborated on fairy tale review, and you read my story in the Old Lace issue, the Little Earth Cow. That is inspired by a vacation I took in Three Oaks, Michigan. So it's sort of just like a little town that had some really interesting element, like interesting antiques at an antique shop, and just like a collection of paintings that drew me into this fairy tale mode. Um, Whereas, yeah, and then like the cities kind of, I don't want to say the cities are not fairy tale. You could certainly have a fairy tale in a city, but that's because it's more familiar to me, then I think it puts me in the mode of realism as opposed to like this more abstract land of story.
Nice. Joseph Cornell, to quote Dreams Under Glass, was the first artist that made Benny think, you can do that. He's Benny's wish for fairy godfather, references to Cornell's work appearing frequently in the book. I had limited knowledge of him before, but Benny's narrative gave me an engaged foundation rather than one I was compelled into. Your second chapter's opening is actually a great example of how you familiarize readers with Cornell. Sunlight warmed Benny's pale, thin forearm. A metal keypad surgically implanted there, she imagined sleepily, could thwart reveries with electric zaps. The zaps would travel up her arm, which arranged and rearranged disparate objects into dream boxes. Flotsam, a la Joseph Cornell, cheap toys, hard candy, vintage cutouts, things grasping at wonder, and by entering her brain, kill the desire to make art. One could devise a quasi-Victorian design for such a contraption, wires entwining with nerves, all the way up to the frontal lobe. Zip, there goes your inner life. Zap, back to work. She descended into the subway with Utopia Parkway, a biography of Cornell that she read intermittently, hoping it would help her find her own path. He, too, had an overbearing mother. His day jobs gave him headaches and stomach aches, just like Benny's. His diary entries chronicled airy lunches, red jam rolls, lemon cake, chocolate egg creams. Aunt Ruby could have been one of the girls lunching at automats that Cornell brooded over, prim and oblivious to him. When she used to lean in to kiss Benny as a girl, she'd smelled of rose perfume and cold cream. Cornell's influence on Benny's creative process is apparent a few pages later, and it's the passage that starts with a postcard of Cornell's Untitled Marine Fantasy with Tamara Tumanova hung beside her computer in a striped purple-red bodice vaguely resembling veins and an expansive skirt of kelp and fleshy seaweed. The ballerina floated with hands and face poised upward in calm exaltation. Silver, red, gold, and green dappled fish swam. Murky butterflies flew. Coral grasped, and sea vegetables swayed. And thanks to this magic of the shared screen, we can actually show readers some of the Cornell pieces that you write about. Here we go.
Me. So Cornell, he was very into fairy tales, very into opera and ballet, and there were performers that he had like these kind of um platonic crushes on, and like so he they would be like central. So like Tamara Tumanova, she's in a couple of at least a couple of pieces, maybe more than that, but like there's two in my mind. There's this one and there's the other one I sent to you. Um and there's a bit of yearning in there, but there's also this serenity that um Benny doesn't have.
Mm.
And so it's kind of like it's a nice place for her to rest her eyes. And um, I don't think in the course of the story, she doesn't always get this kind of serenity, but I think her love of Joseph Cornell is related to what's mentioned in the excerpt, right? That he also struggled with a day job, but he also had this love of dreamy things and also nostalgia, right? So she's nostalgic for his period and he's nostalgic for a period prior to him, and they're both kind of reaching for something that doesn't, ephemeral, it doesn't really exist anymore. And that's kind of in tension with the pressures of what she's in right now, right, with the coming economic crisis and all of that.
So it's the kelp calm before the storm.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And there's also Taglioni's jewel casket. And there's a beautiful passage actually on page 33, and I'll read a little bit of that just to give us more of an understanding of how this jewel casket is a part of Binny's thought process. And she's at her paralegal job. In the kitchen, with supreme care, she refilled the faux ebony box of espresso pods, robust, earthy, fruity, floral, light, the tasting notes of purple, gold, black, green, and copper pods arranged in tidy lines. Little caffeine soldiers in colorful helmets. The pods had Italian names: Arpeggio, Lungo, Maestro. What about an assemblage like that? Like Taglioni's jewel casket, a velvet lined box Joseph Cornell had made in homage to the Romantic era ballerina Marie Taglioni, who traveled with a jewel casket full of precious stones gifted to her by European royalty. Instead of gems, Cornell filled the box with neat rows of glass, ice cubes from a dime store, and strung fake diamonds along the top. The word casket, of course, elicited the notion of death. Like the box was some relic buried in a sumptuous tomb, the name coffee casket exuded much less magic. Capra's coffee casket? No, no, no. Maybe instead of espresso pods, she'd use gumdrops and a candy necklace. Gumdrop casket? Now that title sparkles. And I do love the cubes in this casket here, and they actually remind me of old school Kodak flashes. And my
Hmm.
grandma kept shut a hutch for many, many years, and the top drawer of the hutch was old recital programs, matches, candles, and this repository of it's like every kind of archive you could think of from the Kodak flashbulb years from the 80s into the early 90s. And there is that sort of flashiness. It's a muted flashiness, but I just love the idea of a jewel casket. And then we have setting for a fairy tale, and we will talk about fairy tales later, but I do love how you've got the architecture, these oblong windows, and these branches that just seem to be growing out of the rooftop. It's like Cornell knew 75 years before living roofs became a huge thing in the green architecture movement. So he had his crystal ball, probably in a jewel casket as well.
Yeah.
And that gets me thinking about the other artists that you cite in your book. You have Mark Rothko, Pierre Auguste Renoir, and Damien Hirst, to name a few. But what makes Cornell the center of Binney's muse universe?
I think there's something, I don't know if unassuming is the right word, but there's something about his work that it's it's attractive to her, but it doesn't have like the ego of some of those bigger artists that you mentioned. And Damien Hirst gets mentioned. He was very in that time, there was that, I think there's a scene where her friend mentions a skull that's covered in a real human skull covered in diamonds or something like that, right? That was a real thing that was auctioned for I don't know how many millions at the time. And But, Cornell, he's using often discarded objects and putting together something, like I said, dreamy and childlike. And I think she's attracted to that, even though over the course of the novel she kind of realizes like she can't just, when she's trying to make things that are like his, like it never works, right? She has to kind of figure out, well, what is she gonna make? Um, and you had a question about, was that your question about the artists in the, or do you mean,
So for Benny, I guess why is he so central? We are always having these Cornellian, and I love that description, Cornellian. The fact that he is her North Star, he is the wished for fairy godfather, as opposed to someone having a fairy godfather that they would like in the form of a Renoir or in a hearse. But it's always about Cornell, and the fact that you've got these that you can talk about a Cornell box, and I think just the way that it can be contained
hmm.
and the way that you like magic can always have its own little container. But is that maybe why Benny is she just looking for the everyday magic to take her out of her everyday paralegal life?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, she's looking for wonder and enchantment, but something, yeah, containable, right? That like she can put together these things, and and hold it and behold it at the same time,
Mhm.
as opposed to like Damien Hirst. I think he did like took an entire cow and cross-sectioned it, and that's a whole other thing, which that's interesting too, but not, that's not what attracts her.
Mhm.
Um, so,
Yeah, the more I read Dreams Under Glass, the more I wanted to go and take because it is, as a someone who's employed at Western Michigan University, I have the opportunity to take a class and don't have the time for it. But if I ever did go back and take one credit here, one class there, definitely this book is pushing me into that art history. And
yeah.
so I thank you for that. And because I guess my way into the art world, I would have been around 2000 through 2002 when I was at the Cleveland Institute of Music. You had the Cleveland Institute of Art, and you could just there was also the art museum, and they were within walking distance. And that's I think I like many people, I did have a Rothko, not an actual Rothko print, but a Rothko poster.
Yeah.
There would be an entirely different conversation to just say, oh, when I did have that Rothko print. But when did you start to discover Cornell in your artistic life?
It was in the early 2000s, and I think it was at the Art Institute in Chicago before I lived here, but I was visiting and there was an exhibit on his work, and I was just really taken with it. And I think I was already thinking about this book. And so I think choosing to have my protagonist be into the art was a way where I could spend more time with it and just like really engage with it, right? It's just like give your characters things that are interesting to you, right? Like why would I
Mhm.
choose something that didn't engage me, right? So um and I think I still have that brochure from that exhibit. And I think they even had like a little screening of one of the short films that he made. I think you can find some of his short films online. They're wonderful to watch. Yeah.
Great. At Christmas, Benny's friend Gary admits that he loves her. And I guess it's enough to say I love you to Benny. That means that she will let you in to her world of art. This is exactly what she does on 122. After dinner, they cozied up on her futon with a sweating bottle of Prosecco. The fizz buoyed her up. I want to show you something, she said. Crouching beneath her work table, she opened the garbage bag that hid infection, the one piece that was close to done. Inside, the little boy with the ice cream smile shined up at her in the dark. Turmeric dusted the cluster of gluey jujubes that orbited him like a small yellow moon. Nestled around the boy and the cosmic viral microbe, silk marigolds. strips of old plaid flannel, similar to what the little boy wore, lined the box. When it was on display, vanilla scented candles would burn atop the diorama, wax dribbling, altar like. The box commemorated a life unknown to her, save for a chance encounter on a subway platform. Holding her breath, she lifted it up like it was a baby she delivered. I think this one is almost done. Gary joined her, peered inside. This is awesome, Vinny. You think? Yes, I think. This is great. What's it called? She cleared her throat. Infection. Weird. I love it. Who's the little boy? A stranger. I found the photo on a subway platform. You should show Ellen. Really? Yes. She's your friend at an art gallery. And that's like, he touched her arm excitedly. That could be your shtick. I find old photos on subway platforms and mix it with other cool finds, and boom, here's my art. Yeah, but she knew she shouldn't ask. Do I really need a shtick? A gimmick? Sure. He kissed her. Maybe it isn't that shtick, but you need one. Anyway, we should celebrate. He refilled their glasses. We'll take it to Ellen Saturday. And I should also note that Ellen is the one in the annotation that I've been keeping. That's the failed sushi model and the little bit of a frenemy. I'm visualizing the stare down between these words, aesthetic and shtick. What are your reasons for why these two either share the same pocket or stand diametrically opposed?
Yeah. I think in her mind maybe they're opposed, but I think so. One of the things that interested me in developing this story was the developing mind of a 25-year-old. So like her decision making, and I think related to that is how she sees herself as an artist and how she hopes to move through the world. I think often when you're early in the process, you maybe resist the notion of like, I have to say what I do, right? I have to put it into words. Like the dreaded artist statement, for example, where you have to describe what you do and then try to like make it appealing to other people, sometimes feels like this abhorrent activity. And like, why would I reduce what I do to a shtick, right? Like, so, and you often come across like branding for artists and that kind of thing, which like one needs for applying to grants or for getting your work out there. You have to be able to talk about what you do, but there's something too commercial about it, right? When you put it in those words, right? So this is her resistance to that, right? That notion that like it could become a shtick or a gimmick rather than like a distillation of like, this is what I'm doing right now with my art.
Mhm. And I think about the music worlds when you would have, say, young performers who can dazzle you with Paganini or Vinyavsky. They can hit all the notes, and that becomes the shtick. But then what is there when they grow older out of that prodigy phase? And that's when you think about aesthetic, when you think about, okay, you can't have the same type of, yay, look at me, I'm dancing around the fingerboard. That doesn't quite hold up in a Brahms concerto or a Beethoven concerto. And so I'm always looking for, as I trained as a musician, what are the parallels between music and writing or art and writing and shtick and gimmick? And one of the legendary stories is, and you actually, I think, can see a clip of this on YouTube, Midori as a teenage prodigy when she was playing Leonard Bernstein's Serenade, and he was conducting. And this was at the Tanglewood Summer Music Festival, home of the Boston Symphony in the summer. And she broke her E string on her violin and she handed it to the concertmaster, and she got the concertmaster's violin, and then she continued right on. And I mean, it's people, she was known then as the the little teenage virtuoso who was able to just flawlessly hand it off. And it kept for a while. It was like, well, is the E string going to break on Midori's next concert, and will she be able to do that again? But then eventually she progresses into this artistry, and I believe the Carnegie Hall debut was made at 19 or 18, one of those post Prodigy years. But by that at that time, I mean, you can hear definitely that there is no shtick, there's no Prodigy gimmick. Here is someone who is ascending into their artistry, and I think that's probably what Binny feels like. And maybe this is part of that whole Bildungsroman with Neuroses assist, but it is this ascension, and you have the little Joseph Cornell, like the fairy dust of his inspiration that sprinkles that gives her some elevation. You have some of the career precariousness that we'll get into in a little bit. You have the fact that she does take that move out of Aunt Ruby's inherited apartment to go find her own place. And there's the financial risk that comes with that. But there's also, I think that does give her in her head more of that bona fide artist credential. And I'm just curious too, when you decided for Binny to forego Ruby's apartment to then strike out on her own, was that, how did you come up with that decision? Is that just part of the natural evolution of the artist?
Um, I think there was the desire for her to be more independent from the home nest, right, in Brooklyn, and putting it in the practical terms of let me live near the office if I can, um, was a way for her to try to make it make sense, even
Mhm.
though like it is like financially ruinous. Her decision, like she had a rent stabilized apartment, rent controlled apartment, and now she's paying, you know, not that.
Mhm.
On the east side of Manhattan. And I had a lot of fun writing that scene where she sees, the room for not room for whatever, like apartment for rent in the antique shop window on First Avenue, and just imagining these, the characters who own this little building that she ends up living in. And I just um there was something very fun for me coming up with, even though they're not in the book very much at all, her new landlady, and
Mhm.
having her have that other flavor of New York life, right? There's so many varieties, but
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
After New Year's Day, we find Binny at the MoMA, where she notes not a single one of the special exhibits focused on stuff made by a woman. Was that her problem, the lack of role models? There were things mixed here and there in the permanent collections, of course. As if she hadn't spent enough on the admission ticket, she found herself in the museum store purchasing a hot pink book, Infinity Net, the autobiography of Yayoi Kusama, the artist she was sure she would loathe for her unkindness to Joseph Cornell. There's someone stepping on the fairy godfather. At home, she flipped through the book. When she was a girl, Kusama wrote, a field of violets sang to her. Beanie kept the book open to that page, put her pillow on top, and went to sleep, hoping for a miracle. Well, on the other hand, the one character who can accelerate Binny's trajectory in the art world is a woman, Alexis Thorne, and we meet her in a gallery. There she is, Gary said. Across the room, Ellen, all in black, stood at the elbow of a woman of Amazonian stature in a vermilion sheath dress that accentuated her healthy bone structure. Thick black hair, straight and sleek, hung down to her waist. Rapunzel quality. You could scale a building on that hair. The man in the bulbous coat pulled the Amazon away from Ellen. Binny and Gary gravitated toward her. He's totally buying the whole series, Ellen murmured, eyes sparkling. Binny tilted her head toward the Amazon. Is that the artist? That's my boss. Oh, the patrician 50-something Susan Sontag doppelganger version of Alexis vanished from Binny's mind. Where's the artist? Ellen turned. In another corner of the room stood the slinky woman of the paintings, wearing a black knit cap and a slouchy sweater that fell off one shoulder. The Amazon was now introducing the bulbous coated man to her, and he was shaking her one hand in his meaty two. The Amazon was all smiles. Binny drained her glass and felt flushed. The Amazon moved on with a toothy grin. Ellen grabbed Binny by the arm. Alexis, she blurted, I want you to meet my good friend Binny. You should see her work sometime. Alexis's eyebrow arched, giving Binny a swift appraisal that felt wholly different from the one Arlene had subjected Gary to. Binny wished she had given more thought to her outfit, beyond a boxy sweater and her nice jeans. Charmed. And what do you do? She asked it hurriedly, seemed eager to move on. Dioramas, like assemblages, that sort of thing? Binny's face burned. Charming. Come in sometime. Show me something, Alexis said, handing her a card. Binny took it and patted her purse as if to find a card of her own to give, which she did not have. Alexis had no time for this charade. A silver fox of a man with a young, intricately freckled face moved toward them. Excuse me, Alexis said, lightly touching Binny's shoulder. Binny's insides wrestled around like a hyena. Brent, the air kissed. Ellen, take Brent's coat. Ellen winked at Binny, and they were gone. The hyena rolled around in the grass while Binny's heart pounded in her ears. You imbecile, she thought. That was way too easy. Way too easy. Alexis had just wanted to get rid of her. Why had Ellen put her on the spot? She turned to Gary. I think this means we can go now. Gary seemed disappointed to leave the party so soon. Really? Binny gave one furtive nod. All right, if you want. Outside, he jettisoned the disappointment. I'm proud of you. She stared at the card, minimalist gray with a hint of cantaloupe. Alexis Thorne, curator. The phone number used chic dots rather than dashes. I didn't do anything. He tissed. Can we be happy, please? I'm sorry. Yes, let's celebrate. Let's get some fancy cocktails. Alexis, wow, this is quite the impression that she makes on Binny, and Binny's just recoiling. And what many of us probably do when we are around these people that have the opportunity to maybe help us take steps into larger artistic worlds. We recoil, we shrivel, we go back and we analyze some more. But this is not the last that we'll see of Alexis. But to take it back to that earlier passage where Binny is alluding to the paucity of female artists, I'm just wondering, Anca, who could you think of in terms of female or genderqueer artists, photographers, sculptors, gallery owners, and those who are doing installations? Who would you recommend for us to get a better sense of this art world, and so that we don't find ourselves in that Binny type of mindset where can I see anybody that was representative of my gender?
Yeah. Just some favorites that you probably folks have heard of: Louise Bourgeois, Jon Riccio, Hilma F. Klimt, Lenora Carrington, who also wrote, Remedios Varos, Betty Saar, who did some assemblages, Judy Chicago, if you know the dinner party at the Brooklyn Museum is like this huge room with there's a like a plate for each figure in feminist history, basically. It's like a dinner party. Marlene Dumas, Kara Walker, Wangechi Muchtu. I know this is just a string of names, but I hope you can pause and Google each of them and seek them out. Yeah, at some point in the writing process, my editor was like, "Why doesn't Benny go to an art gallery during this story or go to a museum. And so what I did was I looked at, well, what was on in MoMA at this time. And then it was like, oh, not a single woman. Well, that's
Mm.
interesting. Let me explore that. And like having that realization can then open the door for her later, right, to kind of seek out some other models.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Good. And this it's helpful to me. I always love building lists of artists I need to go research. I need to go spend time looking at their work online. And so this was helpful. All right. Well, when we critique, the very genesis of these interviews was we would be walked through by the author an early draft and then a published work. So we're going to do that now. I believe it's the very first page of your novel, and I'm going to get the shared drive going and get the shared screen going so that we can see the first page, and then we will be able to see the second. You'll walk us through then with the revision process. So I just need to toggle and
While you're toggling, I'm happy to talk about the structural, like there's some very large structural changes
yes, please.
that I made because the what I sent you and what was published, there revisions I'm going to talk about, but there were some huge changes that I made from the first, the first draft and to the published draft. So it didn't make sense to send the first page of the because it would just be it's just a completely different
Mhm.
scene. And the first six chapters ended up getting cut. And so what it was chapter 8 or so in the first draft is now chapter 1. And then I did this whole thing, like I had this like poster board with like columns for each chapter, and then I took little post-it notes and like all the things that I cut out that I wanted to put back in somewhere, I then had to find as backstory and kind of weave back in. And then I kind of rewrote the opening with like a few different ideas. I think one I had like the Bernie Madoff opening where like the scandal is like the opening scene.
Mhm.
And then this is why this file is called Black Car Rewrite. It's the opening is with the black car spitting her out at
Mhm.
53rd and 3rd.
Yeah.
So this page that you have in front of us is what I sent to Lanternfish Press as like my official submission. And so would you like to read this and then talk about the changes I made?
Would you like to read it? I mean, either way is fine by me.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
The black car spit Benny out at 53rd and 3rd. The lawyer inside lost the casino bankruptcy trial, big time, and he had a pitiful countenance. She'd almost tried to put him out of his misery with a kiss. Could he tell that was happening? She thought, replaying in her mind the way she leaned forward slightly toward his sorry face and loosened tie, that he could tell. Well, that was embarrassing. She'd pick up her paycheck and move on with her Friday night. The sun had set. She had already made plans with Gary from Newark on the Acela. Lately, he'd been forthright, dropping hints. They'd weathered several stupid relationships together, like a boy now squatting in Detroit hoping to be the next Banksy, and a girl who aspired to be a diplomat and found Gary's Iraqi Jewish lineage titillating. They were, for the first time in their 5-year friendship, both single. The driver deposited her rolly bag on the sidewalk. The lawyer muttered, "See ya Monday." Her bag went to thunk as her clearance rack heels clacked. Gary waited for her beneath the pink granite pillars of the lipstick building, cheeks rosy from the first chill of fall, fists thrust in his charcoal jacket pockets, a black knit cap hiding his brown curls. When he saw Benny, he lifted his head from its natural melancholic tilt and smiled. Still wound up from the trial, the loss, the pitiful lawyer, A harshness welled up in her chest. She said, "You could have waited in the lobby." His long brown eyelashes brushed up against his wire-rimmed glasses. He said, "I've had my daily allotment of recycled air." She softened. They hugged, their usual platonic, hips angled away from each other hug. Want to come up?
Cool. And then we'll toggle. Can you see the chapter one?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So, should I just read it or maybe just talk about the changes or?
Talk about the changes
Yeah,
first.
yeah, yeah. So you'll see the first sentence, the black car spat Benny out at 53rd and 3rd is the same. But we did go back and forth on this. And my publisher, Lanternfish Press, they're based in Philadelphia. And one of my editor's questions was, should we alter this to make it more clear for people who are not from New York?
Hmm.
And I wanted to think about that. And there are other ways that we've done, we've tried to, like, I wanted it to be both appealing to people who knew New York and also welcoming to people who don't know New York. But I decided um, making the first sentence too explained, I guess, kind of messed with the rhythm of the sentence that I had in mind, and also this notion of like she is inside of the city, right? She is a person of the city, inside of the city.
Mhm.
And so we ended up keeping that sentence. And then the next sentence you'll see is a little more, so in the first one, I think I have the file open. Let me see. The first version is the lawyer inside lost the casino bankruptcy trial big time, and he had a pitiful countenance.
Hmm.
Which we ended up with. The lawyer she was riding with had lost his casino bankruptcy trial big time and wore a pitiful countenance. So it's a little more, I guess, grammatically correct. Um, and one thing in the editing process is thinking about like finding that balance. I, sometimes I like to play with grammar and diction, and it's not always going to be like correct, right? So like I have fun with that, but also just finding the balance with the editor who wants to like clean things up a little. And so that makes it more clear, right? The lawyer she was riding with had lost his casino, clarifying that she is in the car with him. And then I think the next change after, well, that was embarrassing. We have the sentence mistakes, the price of knowledge, which honestly my editor added, and we didn't talk about it, but I liked it a lot. And I thought this makes sense. So we want to talk about editing as, it's writing is a collaborative process. And that's an example of that, where I really liked it. It made sense. And I just kept it. I didn't even question it. I was like,
Mhm.
yeah, that belongs there. And then, okay, she'd pick up with her paycheck and move on with her Friday night. The sun had already set, and she'd made plans while at the Newark stop on the Acela to meet her friend Gary for dinner. And then in the early draft, we had lately he'd been forthright, dropping hints. And so my editor wanted just a little bit more, just building out a little bit that the notion of their relationship at the beginning of the book. And she put this placeholder sentence. She's like, this is not a great sentence, but you get the idea. This is, can you do something with this? And I came up with, let me go back to the Zoom. Oh, if you can go back to yeah, there we go. Romance had not been part of their history, although lately their relationship hummed with a subtle electric charge. And like in terms of like the process of line editing, one of my favorite things to do, something that I'm just, I'm very conscious of a story having too many sentences that are with she as a subject or he as a subject are just like can be very bland. So like finding these opportunities to change the subject, right? And then also one of my favorite things is thinking about the beginnings and ends of sentences. Like, so in the process of line editing, like, what is the most interesting word that I can put at the beginning? What is the most
Mhm.
interesting word that I could put at the end? So, I really liked thinking about that, their relationship having this subtle electric charge, like things are getting ready. And then you have a little bit about their background that, is the same in both versions.
And I do enjoy talking about sentences because normally in my poet head, I'm thinking about syllable counts. I'm thinking about do these sentences, if they're at the ends of lines, are they going to end on long vowels? Or how am I going to work enjambment into it? But the idea that you're also thinking in the prose world about the rhythm of sentences and then even with that mistakes, colon, the price of knowledge. I go back to that part when we have about Cornell as the first artist that made Benny think, colon, you can do that. So it's just so much interesting what grammar can do for us. And I I should get my hands into the more of trying out some prose. And I did try prose from about 2009 through 2012, and poetry was a better swim. But maybe now I've just as this book's inspired me to become that page by page annotator, and you've inspired me to go take an art history class. Maybe I should go inspire myself and by this book and go leap into writing a story.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, that would be fun. I
Yeah.
actually used Frank O'Hara's lunch poems as kind of like a tuning fork for
Mm,
not for every single draft, but like for one or two of the middle drafts, I would read from that and then sit down to write because like I wanted to have like a similar tone, kind of a similar feel throughout, and that felt like
mhm.
the right fit. Anyway.
It's always good when we can give Frank O'Hara some credit and say, yeah, he did help me write this. He's helped me teach a few classes in my day-to-day life. And probably the true account of talking to the sun at Fire Island is probably the best poem of his that my number one Frank O'Hara poem, and I'm sure many people would have others, but that's the one. It was the first one that it was the Frank O'Hara magnet for me. And it was my first semester at University of Arizona, and I was in a class with many literature majors, and there were three creative writing majors. And I O'Hara was just he was kind of like the tow rope for me into those larger discussions. So thank you, Frank. I wrote the annotation. That's so, and I italicized, of course, so cubicle life. After underlining the sentence, strips of blue paper fluttered into the recycling bin from the office guillotine. When Binny's not in her apartments, galleries, or subways, she's at her paralegal job with Capra, Zaman, Baxter, and they are a boutique, red, scrappy firm with three partners. One full-time associate, Binny, privately dubbed the Zombie, a rotating cast of part-time contract attorneys and underlings like Binny. And another passage you have that brought me back into my 40-hour work week life is on page 108. Binny returns to her desk. Beatrice and Rick stared impassively at their computers. When they did this, you could never tell what they were thinking or if they were listening but pretending not to listen. They were experts at the cubicle game. As soon as Baxter's gone, we're all cutting out of here early, muttered Beatrice, trained upon her screen. Oh, and here, she said, finally looking at Binny and handing her an envelope over the cubicle wall. The plastic window crinkled under her thumb. Binny glanced inside at her bonus. One short line and three zeros. That wasn't nearly enough to fully realize her tower of glass eyes. Maybe if she invested the money. Haha. Might as well flush the check down the toilet. Maybe she could pretend she never got the raise and squirrel away the difference. But she had opera tickets and nothing to wear. Well, she thought, trying not to grow too giddy, I have some shopping to do. Nostalgia note, I love how this 2008, 2009, it predates direct deposit. I mean, I know some people were into it at that point, but
Mhm.
I held out as long as I could. I would, and I there's something about getting those checks in the with the envelopes, the crinkle, yes. Now, aside from Rick the office villain, Binny's longevity at CZB is unsteady to say the least after Baxter's death. And his cause of death was he had one contaminated king cake bite too many. Also, with this contaminated king cake bite, that's a tongue twister. There's some good inner workings of Binny where there's this, did she subconsciously contribute to his death? Even though she gives him the Heimlich maneuver, but the fact that that king cake is contaminated by some insecticide spray, everyone knew about it, but I mean, I guess the Binny, I had it more on the front brain as she was in the building, I think on the Friday night when, or the Friday afternoon when the guy was coming to do the spray. So she's racked with this guilt, and that's more than neurosis. That's churning with this Bildungsroman. But if we just take a step back into this is Binny's paycheck, this is her paralegal life, this is the money that helps fund her purchases of glass eyes and art supplies. And this was part of the money that gave her that emboldened nature to leave the rent control department to go live the artist life in the life that's also closer to the lipstick building that gives her a little bit more time to sleep, a little more time to create. But what mindset did you find yourself in while writing the corporate parts of Dreams Under Glass?
Ah, yeah. I in thinking about, for example, there are references to her time in the office as giving her migraines, just sort of remembering the recycled air, which Gary also refers to in the opening, that he also has an office job and the recycled air, and like the unpleasant fluorescent lights, for example. Um, and there's like a particular smell of like elevator banks and really strong coffee. I don't know if you know, like you step into like certain office buildings and like it brings you back to like the
Mhm,
concept of a big corporate office building. And so that was all kind of in my sense memory when writing these scenes. And um thinking about like the tension that Benny has right between like this is, this is paying her bills, this could be helping with like gathering of materials for her art, but it's also that the time suck of like you need to be here, you need to do these, you need to follow these steps, and then like are you going to have energy for any of that afterwards? But that's like that's the tension of for so many who are trying
mhm,
to find that balance of art and life, making a living.
mhm. I also, now that you talked about scent memories, I'm also getting those Glade plugins that where you see the little plug-in fluid slowly deplete, and it's, I mean, I do love my scented candles, but I think the plugins I could do without. But
Hmm.
yeah, now you're opening up, and I think the last time I smelled quite a strong plug-in was in a leasing office for an apartment complex that I was looking at and considering seriously because I had some nostalgic vibes with the out the outside of the building. But then I got inside and I'm like, no, no, the air freshener sealed the deal and not in a good way.
Yeah.
Well, I returned to Gary and the holidays since it's a Thanksgiving discussion Binny has with him that leads to my understanding of your book's title. She thought Gary was deeply stuck, she admitted to herself. His low pay meant trying to get as many hours as possible, and between that and the long commute, he never seemed to have the time to find something better. He was deeply in debt from college and worked a sales job that any high school graduate would be fine at. The degree offered the tiny solace of maybe one day becoming the middle manager of a business he couldn't care less about. Vinny couldn't figure out what Gary was passionate about beyond his vague sense of wanting to do something good for the world. He always lit up around the children, clamoring on the shiny orange seats of the F train. She imagined he'd make a great school teacher. His student debt would certainly not be fixed by that career change. Cars whooshed off the Prospect Expressway and down Ocean Parkway. She craned her neck back. The full moon shone through the bare branches of a thin locust tree. Betty Smith's tree of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn fame. Benny imagined a campaign for it, the locust tree, thriving despite circumstances since 1943. Gently, Gary said, they just want to make sure you have a plan. That's all. And these are Benny's parents, the ones that want to make sure she's got the plan. I know, a soulless plan, a plan of drudgery. She focused on the moon through the branches. I don't think that's fair. Everything they expect is too normal. It's unreal and dead. That sounds really dramatic, Benny. Are you sure you're not overreacting? She wasn't about to ask if he'd read The Bell Jar or explain the feeling of a glass dome descending over everything. She didn't want him to become alarmed at the implication of the reference, if he knew it, or at the oddity of the explanation, if he didn't. Maybe it was a thing you just got or didn't get. I read The Bell Jar in 2017, and last spring when I syllabized it, that second time around, I remember hoping my students who go on to literature careers, either inside or outside academia, wind up teaching Plath's book, meaning that they would reread it too. And what I most appreciate about your bell jar reference is that it gives us insights into Benny's personal library, more of which we learn about, and this is page 125. Benny curled up in a ball against the wall and sketched with a notepad against her bare thighs, sheets in a tangle. Eyeballs staring out, eyeballs going googly, eyeballs giving side eye. Meanwhile, Gary browsed her short stack of books on Cornell, on dreams, astronomy, bird poems, a compendium of famous silent film moons. Now, another novel that's set in New York City is Min Jin Lee's Free Food for Millionaires. It has a protagonist named Casey Han, also a recent graduate, who's financially strapped and corporately cogged. Yet at one point, we find her holding a first edition, American edition of Jane Eyre, excellent condition, at the price of $5,000. And in this scene, the bookshop proprietor, Joseph, discloses Casey's reading habits. Joseph looked at the girl in the hat. She had such a sad expression on her face, and he wanted to make her happy. He closed his eyes and raised his arms dramatically. He waved his hands, hocus pocus, like a circus magician, in the direction of Casey's handbag. In your bag, you have a worn paperback of Middlemarch. What? She said out loud. The zipper of her bag was closed. How? She asked. Joseph burst out laughing, unable to contain himself. We waited at the same bus stop on the corner of 72nd and Lexington until last fall. From Mondays through Fridays, you wore office clothes, and on the weekends, you wear sublime hats and extravagant dresses. Nowadays, I don't see you during the week, but on Saturdays, when I see you on the bus, you are always reading. Sometimes I worry that you'll get hit by a car because you're not paying attention. This year, you read Thackeray, Hardy, and Eliot. Either you're a slow reader or you read the same books over and over. Last year, you read Anna Karenina for a long time. You've read some of the Americans, Cather, Hemingway, Dos Pesos, and Sinclair Lewis. Nothing past 1945, almost. Almost never anyone French. Casey opened her mouth but felt confused as to what to say. Was she in danger? I love Madame Bovary and Cousin Bet, she said finally, her statement sounding like a question. Very fine books, Joseph said approvingly. He felt energetic, though Flaubert is superior to Balzac, of course. He tipped his head to the side and adjusted his blue eyeglasses. Casey smiled, not saying anything. She'd read only one book each by those authors. But you often return to Middlemarch. Last Saturday, you were reading it. I figured you'd probably still be in it. But I never noticed you, she muttered. Then it occurred to her that she might have hurt his feelings. She'd been ignored before in places, and she hated to think she had not paid attention to him. She didn't feel afraid of him exactly, but this had never happened to her before. She'd never thought of herself as someone to observe. Another side note. First one was nostalgia and those lovely see-through envelopes with the paychecks. But this is me doing some forecasting of a class I would love to teach someday, somewhere, somehow, the literature of New York. And some of those authors would include Jay McInerney. We've got Bright Lights, Big City, obviously. And then Min Jin Lee, some free food for millionaires. And look at, I mean, just look at it. We're talking phone book, I mean, here. So, and then of course, Dreams Under Glass would be on that syllabus. What books do you think Binny would purchase the more in-depth she goes with her art? And then if you could tell us what books you were reading in those 2008, 2009 months, commenting on how one of them proved formative to your writing.
Okay. Um, she goes more in depth to her art. That's such a good question. Because she, in the book, she reads Utopia Parkway and Infinity Net. Um, I mean, it would make sense to come across Lenora Carrington, right? Because she was also a surrealist and also wrote. And so I'm going to say that's her next step beyond the pages. For me at that time, I knew I wanted to do something with this paralegal story. I didn't really know what I was going to do yet, but um, I remember reading Bleak House, and I had only read the only other Dickens I think I had read before that was Tale of Two Cities in high school, and I remember like crying over the end at my desk with my English homework. It was English homework. And I mean like I'm not like a huge I have not read a ton of Dickens, but I was like, okay, well I should read Bleak House, and I was pleasantly surprised at how funny it was.
Hmm.
Like I wasn't really, I mean, you hear the name and like, okay, it's like what, like the drudgery of, um, I loved it. I loved it. And, as I said, in that time, like did not really have the energy to write much. I just like read on my commute and then I went to sleep. And, so that's like what I remember vividly. I'm sure I read other things. I think I read, if it wasn't that year, maybe soon after Brooklyn Follies by Paul Auster. And there was one other thing that I was going to say. It was like just at the tip of my tongue, but man, I've lost it. But yeah, that was like you were talking about the 19th century uh tomes, right, in Min Jin Lee's excerpt. And I think, you know what? I think I did read Middlemarch in that time. Like I think I was like catching up on I didn't really do a lot of 19th century literature despite being an English major. So maybe I was kind of catching up on those things as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I have a lot of catching up to do in the 19th century. So again, I need to take an art class. I need to write some fiction. I should probably maybe write a book on how to annotate a book. And now I need to, this is my fourth to-do list from our conversation, which is great. I always love having to-do lists that are aesthetically bettering myself. So I will get more of the 19th century literature and we'll chat about this when we run into each other. We'll quiz me on the books I've read that have the word one, the letter one and the nine in terms of their genre, and there's a
Yeah.
little th in there.
Uh-huh.
Well, Binny's Bildungsroman, another fun phrase to say, it crystallizes over the course of 2 pages. And this is towards the end of the book on 236. And since it is such a meaningful passage, would you like to read it?
Sure.
And I guess as the preface to it, Binny is no longer with Job at this point. And isn't there as well some sort of a financial, little bit of a severance package she's getting? And she has to sign some sort of a non-disclosure. So no more day job, but still the high-priced apartment.
Right. And she's got to figure out what she's going to do.
Mhm.
She hasn't figured it out yet. And let's see, where would you like, what page would you like me to begin
Oh,
on?
236. Albert
236.
Albert went to his shop. Albert
Oh
went
yeah.
onto his shop.
Yes, right. Okay. So she had kind of checked in with her parents for a little support, and now she's parting ways. Albert went on to his shop. On Prospect Park West, a new cafe had opened, the nearest place that wasn't a greasy spoon. Alone, Binny shivered on the edge of one of the freshly painted Adirondack chairs outside. They sat in a sprightly row of red, white, and blue. The cafe had a stupid name, the Boonies, but it was perhaps appropriate given the cell reception at her parents' place. She flipped open her phone and dialed a number anyway. Across the street, Canadian geese lurched over the treetops, honking in syncopation. This is Alexis. Oh, hi. This is Benny Greenson. Who? Benny Greenson. We just spoke after New Year's. You saw a diorama of mine and said to call. Oh, I left you a message a while back. I'm sure you're very busy, so I thought I'd give you another ring. A breath. Help me out here. The little boy and the marigolds? Yes, right. Charming. Cars whooshed by. Tell me more about your work. How far should I go?
Well, maybe a little bit more where she actually says she crystallizes that where she talks exactly
Oh, yeah.
about what she's doing.
Yeah. An ambulance siren made her cringe. Well, she hadn't had to talk about her work in a long time. I like to do dreamy assemblages, but I've also played with silicone. My senior show was a silicone cast of my foot. Why was she bringing that up? Her professor had liked the title, Finding My Footing, but it had been so on the nose. It was like a curse, and here she was, and she still hadn't found her shtick. Gary was right. She needed to practice one. I like to combine found objects to create a dreamlike narrative, she said. I'm a big fan of Joseph Cornell, his ephemeral qualities. It was so jumbled. She was throwing anything out there, hoping something would stick. Oh, yes, I can see that. You know, there was a lovely show. Now I'm just thinking aloud. I'll have to go back and look. I'd make a terrible art historian, huh? She said, her speech cranking up in speed as she seemed to position Biddy in a certain slot. I'm trying to remember who was in it. Jackson Pollock, I think. Pollock or someone of that stature in the front, and an intimate room of Cornell's assemblages in the back. I might like to do something like that. The big and the intimate together. The intimate sort of a dark, warm cocoon. Her voice resonated on the last word as if she dreamed of crawling inside of it herself.
Great, yeah. What I love about this, and this little close up of my annotation, it got not one, not two, but 3 stars. I like to combine found objects to create a dreamlike narrative. And we always think about what is our artist statement? What would we send to grants? What would we send to fellowships, etc., residencies? And it's always how do I boil what I've been doing for about a decade and a half for someone who's been writing ever since undergrad. And this is the moment where no job, nothing left to lose, and she just has to dive right in. And as awkward and uncomfortable and nervous as she must be, in the with that the flip phone that could hold the entire fate of her artistic trajectory. She I'm just like, yeah, you did it, Vinny. You finally were able to succinctly say what you do with your art. And it's we had all of these pages leading up to it, these stops and starts, these frenemies, these somewhat dashed hopes, these realizations as we're walking through the MoMA side by side with Vinny, deaths of bosses, evil coworkers who literally are out to just send her into the way of ruin, and also those mysterious photos that kept popping up on her laptop. All that doesn't matter. It all boils down to this one phone call. And I'm wondering, have you had a similar crystallization tied into a phone call or one of those email leaps of faith?
Yeah. Moments where I'm put on the spot like that, maybe they happen and I there are things that they don't spring to mind, but I mean I remember when I got the email from Lanternfish Press about my first book, and like I was just like putting that book out there, and I thought this place looks like a good fit, but who knows if they'll ever write back. And like 2 months after I sent them the manuscript, and it was like a wintry day, there was something crystalline in the air, and I got the email from them saying, "Oh, they love this magical realism and they wanted to publish it." And I guess it was a leap of faith on their part, right? Like I had already done the first part of sending it to them over the transom, and gosh, it was a wonderful feeling, right? Feeling like I had spent so many years on that book, and to have someone say, "Yes, we're going to put it out in the world,"
Mhm.
was a wonderful moment.
Nice. And how did you learn about Lanternfish Press?
So I think initially I was on Twitter and one of their authors had followed me, and then I just looked at what did he write? Oh, I like the sound of what he wrote and the book looks beautiful. And then I clicked over to their website and they said that they publish The Rare and Strange, and I was like, "Oh, that sounds like me." Like that.
Mhm.
So, and I just like kept an eye on them, and when they opened for submissions, I was ready, and like I sent them my work, and it was a fit. Yeah.
Nice. And did you ever do work with them in person, or were you based in Chicago at the time your
I was
first novel was?
I was not. I was based in Seattle. So yeah, they're based in Philadelphia,
Mhm.
and I think they are very involved in the Philadelphia literary scene. But this was all over internet. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I submitted from Seattle, and then my second book I was already in Chicago, and of course met them in the process over the years. But yeah.
Mhm. Nice. Well, thank you for your time and insights, Anka. I came across your work first in 2014. You had a story more like home than home in the Emerald issue of Fairy Tale Review. Then, as we heard a little bit earlier, you have a story, Little Earth Cow, which is your second appearance in Fairy Tale Review in the Old Lace issue. And now you're the guest co-editor of the Silver issue alongside founding editor Kate Bernheimer. And we've had some wonderful conversations about these prose pieces, these poems. We've shared in the editing process, reviewing with Google Docs and PDFs. And Kate's been there with us, and Julie Warheit of Wayne State University Press. And we're getting ready for the launch of the Silver issue in a short amount of time. This is early February. We're recording this interview and we'll probably go live before AWP. But do you know the table where people can find, since this probably will go live before AWP, where might we find you at AWP in 2026 for Fairy Tale Review?
Yeah, so I will be at the table. I believe it's table number 840, but good to double check. It will be next to the Wayne State University Press, so maybe you can catch your eye with either of those. I'm really excited to meet fans of Fairy Tale Review and any of the contributors to the silver issue who will be there. That will be super fun. We went into the issue. I had this idea to do a food theme, and of course, Fairy Tale Review already gets lots of submissions that have food in it, so it just kind of made sense. And I love how it turned out. I can't wait to see it.
Um, yes. What are your projects beyond Fairy Tale Review?
Yeah, so I'm finishing up a collection of essays on food and cultural memory that I'm calling Cosmic Fruit. Bunch of like lyric essays, and in the more middle stages, early middle stages of a novel set in Chicago in the
Mhm.
year 2000. And yeah, th th those are the front burner projects, and then a couple of things fermenting
Mhm.
in
Yes.
the back burner.
And where, in terms of a website, could we find some more of your essays and more of your short fiction online?
So my website is ancawrites.com.
Okay.
So, don't have to worry about spelling my last name. And there's a page for all the essays and links to them and short stories, links to the things that are online. And yeah,
Okay. And feel free to close our discussion by reading a passage from Dreams Under Glass. Any words you'd like to sing us out of the interview with?
sure. So, I'm going to read a section that came out of a writing prompt that was to write a work of ekphrasis about something that doesn't actually exist.
Hmm.
And I'm so grateful for that prompt. And so this is Benny imagining the lipstick building turned into a giant installation.
Mhm.
Benny imagined the whole building empty, like the empty buildings of downtown Wilmington, only 100 times bigger and more catastrophic. What if the whole building, echoing, abandoned, became an art squat? The light would be different, of course. Not the harsh white flickering she'd become accustomed to, but the sun, fractured by the surrounding skyscrapers, the relentless curve of the lipstick building's stacked ovals. What would the thing be, abandoned and given over to art? How many walls could be knocked down without the structure collapsing? How many panthers could she set loose? And what would it look like from across the street, watching them dart by the windows, sleek and black-furred and hungry, knocking over potted plants, heaps of black soil spilling from cracked terracotta as they lunged at the throats of hedge fund managers? Perhaps in the basement mailroom, a vast set of show-bright light bulbs, the kind that lined vanity mirrors in green rooms, walls lined with them to light the dark, to make the viewer squint. There would be a level replicating the experience of a migraine, floating lights, a slight hint of green on the walls, a bare floor scattered with dust and grit, and an enormous rusted pipe slowly rotating through one side of the space, slowly expanding and contracting, creaking as it went. There would be a floor dedicated to office supply hazards, stacks of papers, slippery linoleum, piles of glinting thumbtacks, errant staple guns shooting overhead. Walls lined with rusting paper cutters, their blades yawning open, apt to crash down any minute in a pile of corroded metal promising tetanus. Was this all derivative? Very well, then. It shall be derivative. One floor would be frozen. She'd set the thermostat impossibly low and spray the place with liquid nitrogen. Icicles forming in ceiling grates. Was it the rings of hell she was constructing? Should there be a man in that ring, eternally munching on his colleague's brain? The hot floor would contain vats of steaming black coffee, a bitter stink of burnt grounds and toner fumes. Wallpapering this floor would be documents from tobacco companies, dizzying red text printed on pink paper. Perhaps here we'd have moaning figures, neckties draped over their shoulders, parched mouths panting at the vats of coffee, unable to drink. Bright white walls and bright white floors would comprise the penultimate level. Feathers, glitter, and marshmallow fluff would drip down the walls with, why not, projections of hardcore pornography. Or the porn could be projected onto piles of white feathers scattered on the ground with a looping soundtrack of smacks and squishes. On the rooftop, the crown jewel, an enormous diamond-encrusted Buddha, his belly cut open so you could enter it. Warm and red inside, a mix of ruby rhinestones and winking LEDs and square packets of deep red liquid. The greatest surprise being the portal inside of the belly, swallowing you up, never to return.
Excellent. And that was the section where in my book I wrote the lipstick building as potential art squad. So I this was all part of my amazing journey back into the page by page annotation process. So this has been a thrill to have this conversation, Anca, and I'm so grateful for the time I spent with your book and the constellation of other books where I can now say Dreams Under Glass could have these tie-ins to Free Food for Millionaires. And yes, it does have a little bit of that. We can trace some Sherwood Anderson through conversation in there, and even a bit of Jay McInerney. And it's all this is the center. This is the muse universe of it all. It's around which the others are. This is the sun here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your stewardship of Fairy Tale Review. Thank you for turning literal art into words and for also making me think differently about the ekphrastic process and looking at the creative process when it's put through the lens of fiction, which is such a gift to me as a poet to have this other entry into that world. So thank you, Anka, and have a wonderful afternoon. And thank you to all of our viewers tuning in today.
Thank you so much, John.
You're welcome.